All right. All right. So let's begin this conversation today. I'm very excited to be here and really very honored to be in your presence. I believe that many of you are professional coaches and some of you are therapists, different professionals, leaders, students, many different area of really important people. So I'm very excited to be here and begin celebrating International Coaching Week. And I hope to create some tangible value during this experience and also to create a reflective space where we all go deep within ourselves and then tap into some of the deeper truths that we may have not tapped into so far. So let's look into what are we going to discuss today. So, as you are aware, I believe that when you looked at this topic, uh, you decided to be here, you decided to show up today. That truly means that something in this topic, should every coach be trauma informed, resonated with you somehow. And I always believe in the universe that we live in, there's a beautiful flow. Sometimes, even we didn't try, the flow brings us to the right places. So, for an example, if I invited you to look back at your journey of becoming who you are, being here as a professional coach, the impact that you create, can you recognize there had been certain moments in our life, pivotal moments, which brought us to where we are? So I believe that kind of force, something that is even bigger than us, certain intelligence that is governing, is inviting us to be in certain spaces. So I don't believe in any coincidences. We are here because there's an innate calling for us to be here. So for that matter, I honor your presence. Thank you for honoring us with your presence and celebrating International Coaching Week 2024 with Ignite Global. Now, let's look at this topic. As we do that, I also invite you to introduce yourself in the chat. You may notice at the moment the microphones are muted. The reason is that there were over 80 people who have registered for this session today. So we thought we don't want to create any disturbances during this conversation or the sharing part of the conversation. But later on, towards the end, I would love to hear some of your thoughts, ideas, and insight. So for now, if you have any thing that you'd like to share, feel free to send them in chat. Any questions that you may have, any insight that you may have, and also feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Okay, so let's get started. As a professional coach, um, I am not here to provide you an answer to this question. Should every coach be trauma informed? I will invite you to answer this question at the end of this session by yourself. I feel that's a better way to operate in this space. Now, with that, make a note on the beautiful tree that we see on the screen, and we will see how we move towards this tree. And if you watch the introduction video I sent to you, I think you already have gotten a glimpse of why we have this tree over here. So everyone who's joining this conversation, please make a note. As I'm speaking, I do not see any of you as I'm specially sharing my screen. So if you would like to share something, feel free to send it at the moment in chat. And then later on, I would love to hear from you. Also, your questions, feel free to send them here. I'll try to answer as many questions as possible towards the end of the conversation. And if I couldn't, I'm more than happy to send you an email. Keep in touch and continue this discussion that we begin today. All right, so I would also like to make a note that we are recording this session. Most of the time, you will not be in the recording. The reason is while we are recording this, only myself and the screens that I'm sharing will be recorded. And also, a link will be available to you at a later time where you will be able to access this recording. Many coaches who are unable to meet this session today because of the different geographical locations and time zones they live in, they requested us to record this. So we are going to make it available to you later. And also all the slides that you're seeing currently on the screen are also going to be available to you that you will be able to download them and revisit these slides if you are interested. All right, so with that, let's begin. Coaches, very excited to be here with you today. And I think many of you know who I am, Fernando Etiadura. and I am the founder of Ignite Global. And I am here because I'm deeply passionate in this topic. And as we continue this journey, I will share some of my stories and what drives me to be here. And let's see how we resonate with each other. So as we begin, also as I mentioned, there is no microphones on at the moment. But at the same time, I mentioned that this is going to be an interactive session. Interaction here truly means is interacting with this session, interacting with me, and also interacting with yourself. I think many of the topics that we will be addressing today can be quite sensitive. And in creating a safe environment, I think a psychologically safe environment, it is important that we go deep within rather than going outside during this session. So I would say let's be respectful towards each other. You know that we all have very interesting walks of lives. We come from different backgrounds, different places, and sometimes we may not fully understand each other. And as professional coaches, we are aware of this. So I invite all of you to a psychologically safe space and also create that space for others. So when you comment, when you send questions, insights, please be polite and respectful. And I think I don't have to mention that because we are all professionals and we also abide by ICF guidelines as well. All right. So I invite you to really undertake a fully reflective space, come up with your coaching presence. And I assure to you at the end of this conversation, not only from a perspective of evolution of your understanding of trauma-informed coaching, but also I believe that you will be able to create a deeper understanding about yourself. You might even find some unanswered questions within yourself. And that's what I'm trying to bring you to an enriching session where you will walk away with some light bulbs, hopefully, and also some techniques that you might even be able to embody from the very beginning, from this very moment. All right. So with that, I'm going to invite you to a little bit of a mental task. If I gave you instructions to a mental task very clearly, would you be able to follow the instructions? Would you be able to confidently undertake that mental task? So considering this is a reflective session, I'm going to take pauses time to time, which means that is for you to reflect. All right. Now the mental task is, before I go into the mental task, I want to show you this image. So you are seeing a ball of water, and then it's oxygenated. It has some seaweeds. Now, what is missing in this image? Would you like to tell me in the chat room? Oops. I think some of you read my mind already. Right. So I start to see fish, right? What kind of fish is missing in this bowl? I see goldfish. Anyone else? Gold, right? Yeah, there you are. So you are reading my mind. Okay, so yeah, actually a goldfish. Now, here comes the activity. Here comes the mental task. Imagine a fish tank with oxygenated water and seaweed in it, but do not imagine a goldfish in it. The more you try harder not to imagine the goldfish, the more the goldfish starts showing up. So you are starting to recognize that our mind, although we are confident that we can carefully, consciously, cerebrally hear something and intend to follow instructions, our brain doesn't necessarily follow instructions like that. It has mysterious ways of working. And that's where we begin this conversation today. So as we do that, I would like to also share with you a disclaimer. Now, this conversation is solely intends to be educational and harm reduction purposes. And those who are joining this conversation need to be 18 plus, because certain topics that we will discuss have adult themes. So if you're not 18 plus at the moment, I would say reconsider your attendance here, because some of the trauma-informed topics can also be triggering, which is our next warning, trigger warning. This session consists of references to child abuse, sexual abuse, self-harm, violence, eating disorders, and different mental conditions. So if you have any specific certain triggers that might make you feel uncomfortable, I invite you to really take a step back and take the right precautionary measures. And as professional coaches, often we also have certain ways of embodying psychological safety. It could be potentially imagining a specific, like a protection bubble around us and protecting ourselves. It could be some level of looking at ourselves from above, like aerial perspective, or maybe regulating our breath and so on. So whatever the um, self-care practices that you have already embodied, I invite you to tap into them as well as we begin. In fact, I want to be honest with you. While I was creating this presentation and going through it, I could feel my heart racing. I could feel my palms becoming sweaty. The reason is it's triggering me. And that is the truth about human beings. And you will notice that throughout this conversation. So I invite you to be in this space with the right precautionary measures. And in case if you feel you are triggered strongly, I would say disconnect from the session, manage your emotion first, regulate yourself, and then if you feel comfortable, revisit. In case if you can manage it at the moment, please know that this is recorded, so you can have a look at that later. All right. So moving forward, what is our path today? So we will be going through self-reflections at the beginning, some deeper self-reflections, and then I will briefly introduce to you what is trauma, what are some adverse experiences. And then I invite you to look at one of the case studies from my very own practice, an actual client story. And then towards the end, I invite you to yourself to answer the question, should every coach be trauma informed? All right. Now, as you also continue through this journey, I would love to learn, how are you resonating? What are some of the key takeaways that you're going to create during this conversation? So time to time, you will see this QR code. Feel free to scan it and then share your thoughts. There are only two questions. I am really curious to learn about, how do you resonate with this presentation and this sharing? So if you could share with me towards the end of this presentation, it would be extremely valuable for me. Also, it's a way of co-creating with you together here. All right, so the reflection section of this session begins. What inspired you to become a professional coach in first place? Let's take a step back. And then when you look back at that intention, that inspiration, what does it look like? How does it feel? Self-reflections. So we go inward now. Next question. What do you think is trauma? You don't need to have a dictionary definition or industry definition. I'm really curious to invite you to think about this word that we often hear, trauma. What is your personal definition of trauma? do you feel, think, or believe your life is affected by trauma? Now let's put the trauma aside. As a human being, what are some of the mental, emotional, physical and spiritual challenges you're dealing with? Not only just currently at this moment, but also certain persisting challenges. Sometimes they come and go, or during a specific period of your life, you experience them strongly. They might not be present right now. Feel free to also take notes if you like, or make mental notes. And what are some of your behaviors, feelings, and thinking around these challenges? If you came up with several challenges, feel free to identify some behaviors, feelings, and thinking around each of these behavior, at least just a quick few of them. An important question now. Those challenges that you're experiencing, the way you behave in response to those challenges, the way you respond, how you feel, how you think, are you able to have conscious control over these behaviors, feelings, and thoughts? So, for an example, if one is smoking, we may know that smoking is harmful to self. It's essentially self-harming. Yet, when there's the urge, regardless of this cerebral understanding, one would light a cigarette and another and another. So there is no conscious control over it. Now, that's an example of how we could answer this question. Okay, so at this point of time, we can stop that reflection. So now I would invite you to take a deep breath, right? Really take a deep breath and send some kind, loving energy to yourself. Many of you may have had a long day, or you just woke up and you are so committed to professionally develop and also to be here, learn more about trauma and its impact. So let's send some kind, loving energy to ourselves, like pat on our back and say you're doing well. All right. So we are aware when we look at trauma, now that you have been reflecting a little bit, at all stages of our life, trauma affects us. From embryo all the way to our deathbed, we get traumatized. There are many traumatic events that happen. Sometimes we are not even aware that certain incidents are traumatic to us, but they can be. Now I'm going to invite you to use a scientific gauge. Everything that I'm going to be sharing with you in this conversation is there is a scientific evidence to it. So CDC, Center for Disease Control and Prevention from US, some time ago did an interesting study. In this study, they invited 17,000 people to recognize some adverse childhood experiences. We call it ACEs for short, adverse childhood experiences. And they wanted to study based on the adverse childhood experiences or ACEs that we go through, how does that affect our adulthood? And they focused on three key areas: abuse, childhood challenges, and neglect. Now, from this moment onwards, I'm going to be sharing a debrief of each of it. What are the specific abuses we are talking about? What are the specific childhood challenges we are talking about? And the neglect. So each slide that I'm going to show you from now on will have a couple of them. So I invite you to read through and then make a note. How many of these adverse childhood experiences you may have experienced? You do not need to share them in public. It is a self-note to yourself, and you will find it useful later with the statistics that you are going to look at. And I also would like to point out here that often when we have experienced adverse childhood experiences, we feel guilt, self-blame, and shame around it. And I invite you, you do not have to feel like that because it is not something within your control. What happened to you as a child is not within your responsibility. In fact, I'd like to share with you, you might be surprised. The next three slides, the adverse childhood experiences that you're going to see, I personally have had all of them to a certain level of degree. And some of them were very severe and some of them were minor, but they were present in my life. So you would potentially understand why I am here, why I'm talking about this topic. Because I'm still, even today, I'm impacted by that. Not just only myself, even my sister. All right, so let's look into it. Emotional abuse from the people who are closer to your living environment. Physical abuse. I think many of us have been through because the parenting techniques didn't exist, or healthy parenting techniques didn't exist before a few years ago, let's say. Sexual abuse. In order for something to be qualified as an ACE for sexual abuse, generally we consider that person to be at least 5 years and older. But it doesn't mean a sexual experience that happened with someone who is within the 5 years is any different depending on how we received it. Sexual abuse doesn't always mean penetration. It could be fondling, could be being groped, touched inappropriately. What are some of the household challenges? Mother treated violently or mother treated someone violently. Both ways works. And if you agree with the father, not any different either. Father was treated differently, treated violently, or father treated someone violently. Substance abuse, mental illness in the household doesn't necessarily need to be diagnosed. If you look back, you already can say. Parental separation or divorce. It doesn't necessarily need to be parental separation for a long period of time. Even turbulent parental associations. And someone in your family was incarcerated. Someone went to the jail or to the prison or arrested, interrogated. Emotional neglect. You felt like you were lonely. You felt like nobody cared. You felt like people ignored you. People treated you and you felt sad about it. Emotional neglect. Physical neglect. Your physical needs were not taken care of. The food, the medical needs, a loving hug, a safe place to sleep, security, basic security needs. So these are some of the ACEs that CDC looked at. But I must say this is very limited. So for an example, a child witnessing infidelity in one of the family members, for an example, or a child growing up in a war zone, or a child having to parent their parents, things like that. So it's a very limited study, as you can see, but it's still a powerful study. Now that's the adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. But when we talk about trauma, we need to go further because trauma is not only happening during childhood, it happens throughout our life. So what are some of the prominent trauma experiences that one could go through? I'm not going to go through one by one. There's a little explanation to each of them. On top of those ACEs that you wrote down or you started counting, feel free to count some of these as well. All right, so let's take a step back again and make a mental note of those numbers that you came up with. How many of the trauma you may have been through. And then once again, let's take a few deep breaths. and loving, caring, kind energy towards yourself. And also to people, 8.8 billion people in the world. You're aware that at least 70% of them have experienced a traumatic event in their lifetime. So let's send that healing energy to those people as well. The kind, loving energy. In other words, when you walk down the road, when you get into an argument, when you get upset with a client, when you get upset with your server, the waitress, we forget that they also have been through traumatic experiences. We have no idea how many of them, how much it might be affecting them. So in order for us to cultivate such empathy, not only towards others, but also towards ourselves, it's important that we be educated. We understand dynamics of trauma so that we can recognize as they happen, so that we can be more kind to ourselves, begin a journey of healing, and become an agent of healing to people around us. Now, why I became a professional coach? Because I wanted to become an agent of change. And I feel I'm doing that in my gut. I feel that. And thank you for joining me today. And if I brought any difficult memories, a tear into your eyes, I seek your forgiveness. Have you seen this happening? Have you seen a cat next to a cucumber and having this involuntary muscle reflex? Do you know what is happening here? Do you know the cats who grow up in North America, where there are no, in certain areas where there are no snakes, for an example, no matter how many generations they have been there, if you place the cucumber next to them, they have this involuntary muscle reflex. They get ejected. So your guessing is right. From the corner of the eye, the cat recognizes that there's a cucumber which resembles the shape of a snake, in other words, danger. And then there's an inbuilt coping mechanism into cat's DNA. Cat's involuntary muscle reflex that they just get ejected from that place they're there. It's not involved in the cerebral cortex. It is not in the thinking brain, the outer layer of our brain. It originates from our amygdala directly, which is the fight and the flight response. And obviously, this is the flight response. Let's try to debrief this and try to understand dynamics of trauma. So the traumatic event is some cats in the forest generations ago were bitten by snakes. They were crawling for safety. They were crawling for their life. And it was extremely painful. Something in our DNA, something much bigger than our conscious mind, in this case, cat's mind, recognized that, recognized how painful it is. So it decided, let me store this in my body. There's no time to think when a snake attacks me. Of course, cat didn't do this consciously, right? Some much larger intelligence that is within ourselves, within the cat's body, decided to store that information. And if you consider the cats in North America, they not only thought about themselves, they even thought about their offsprings. That is why, even after 15 generations, where the kittens have never seen a cat, never seen a snake, but they still get ejected from their place when they see a cucumber. The reason is that it originated from a place of love, originated from a place of protecting the offsprings. And how do we protect the offsprings when they are not around us? So this bigger intelligence thought, let's store it in the DNA, because DNA is the only thing that I can truly pass on in case if I didn't survive, so that my offsprings can survive. So this intense fear helps us to survive and also not only help us survive, but also our offspring survive. The stronger the trauma is, the stronger the memory is, the stronger it is written into our body, written into our molecular structure. So we are recognizing we are operating in an interesting duality in this universe: survival. In order for us to survive, we need to constantly recognize danger in our environment. As you're sitting down there, as I'm sitting here, do you know that our peripheral vision, peripheral hearing, peripheral senses are always scanning our surrounding to get ourselves to safety? And that peripheral vision is what gets a cat ejected from its place. So you are starting to recognize fear is an essential requirement for safety. Fear is an essential requirement in order for us to love. So we are between these interesting two paradigms. One side, there's extreme fear, and one side, there's extreme pleasure or love, we call it. Because if there was only fear, if there was only pain, why would we live for? What would we live for? There's nothing to live for. But if on the other side, if there was only extreme pleasure, extreme love all the time, there's no value to it. So creating a balance between fear and pleasure and finding ourselves in between is what is happening to us as human beings living in this materialistic universe. So you are recognizing that fear is essential to feel love. Love is essential to feel fear. Very paradoxical, kind of counterintuitive, like coaching. Now, the interesting thing is, however, the changes that are happening in our brain want to protect us because our body naturally loves us. So in our brain, in our nervous system, in our body, and even in spirit, this trauma is now written in. So when we look at trauma, often we look at trauma and we say, I hate this. It's not something good. But actually, it's trying to safeguard us. It's trying to remind us that there's danger. And our body is intelligent. We never think and save that in our body. But the higher intelligence that is governing our body already has the capacity to store it in our body. Now we're also recognizing that. So it's not only just the trauma that is happening to you in this lifetime, right? It's also the trauma that happened to your grandmother, to your grandfather, your great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather. If you start counting how many great-grandfathers, how many wars, how many world wars have we experienced? How many grandparents in our families may have been assaulted, may have been raped, may have been inflicted a lot of pain. So if their bodies store that information, that means they pass it on to your parents, their parents, and their parents. And you have that intelligence, like the old cats in the forest decided to pass on that love to their offsprings. So your great grandparents, your ancestors, consciously and unconsciously loved you even before you were born. So now the cat sees the cucumber and it gets triggered. A sensory experience or a memory is what we call a trigger in the very basic sense. The moment something similar to that experience is present, we get triggered. So there's a trigger present. And then the cat gets ejected. And we call this trauma response. How we respond to a specific trigger. And sometimes, have you ever felt you had an argument with someone? You spoke in a way that you didn't like. Later on, you think about it and go like, why did I do that? It's very unlikely of me. And you regret, you blame yourself, you feel guilty, you feel shameful about it. If you felt so, if you couldn't process it, what is happening to you is that the trauma response is unconscious, like what is happening to the cat. You cannot consciously necessarily take immediate control over it. Trauma response is originated within our body, and we immediately respond to it initially. And then, as it kicks in into our thinking brain, we gain control over. Because we have two interesting brains, cerebral brain, cortical brain. And then inside of it, we have the subcortical brain. It's often also known as reptilian brain. Well, scientists are arguing, but doesn't matter. What I'm really trying to say is there's this conscious brain, there's an unconscious brain. So the trauma response, when the trigger is present, the trauma response comes from your unconscious brain, so you cannot control it. So don't be hard on yourself. Now, there are 4 key classic trauma responses. We call them fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Fight response is when you often feel irritability, anger, frustration, disappointment, often disappointed, often angry, often frustrated. Recently, one of my friends told me that her dad escaped Soviet from Russia, and he always fought against injustice that was happening in Russia at the time, a long time ago. And when they escaped to another European country, her father couldn't just stay there and appreciate everything. He had to find someone to fight. He would fight with the dog, he would fight with the supermarket worker, he would fight with the bus driver, he would fight everyone. Although he was in a safe space, he was always fighting, was always angry. Flight response, anxiety, fear, panic, over-worrying, depression to a certain extent. We can't face things because it's too strong for our nervous system. The trauma response is too strong, so we want to flight. Have you ever had where you send so many messages to a friend, the friend is not getting back to you? You start to think like, oh, they don't care how much I did, no matter how much I have done. See, they don't care, they don't contact me. You may be right, but there's also a great possibility they're flying away. They are fighting something, so they fly away. They cannot deal with sending a text message. It may be nothing to do with you. They might not be able to open their WhatsApp. They may not be able to open their Messenger because they are flying away. Have you heard about women who have been raped? And during the experience, they completely shut down. They don't say anything, they don't do anything. And later, they were blamed. Why didn't you say? Why didn't you do? Well, they were in the freeze response, which is unconscious response. They became immobile. They couldn't move. They couldn't speak. And this is what we call disassociation. We disassociate from the reality, what is happening to us. And that is why often we don't even remember the trauma that has happened to us. You don't recall large part of your childhood, your adolescencehood. There may be reasons why you have disassociated your memories. But what you have truly disassociated is only the outer layer of your brain, which is the thinking brain. But your subconscious mind remembers, and neurologically, it changes when it happens, so that we become narrowed. We don't want to look at it. We cannot look at it. It's too powerful for our nervous system. So we naturally go into depression. We easily go into isolation, and we call ourselves, I'm a deep introvert. I don't want to go into crowds. Actually, what we are really trying to say here is that I have very strong social anxiety. because I cannot handle the amount, the overload that is going to come into my system. Phone response, people-pleasing behavior, can't say no, prioritize others, rescuing people all the time. And one of the competencies that we often deal with is this, right? As a professional coach, we like to solve the problem for the client, especially during our initial stages of coaching career. We want to solve a problem. We know to achieve the uh, results for the client. I'm not saying that's coming from a trauma response. I'm saying that sometimes we tend to have this behavior. Like we go around and try to help everyone, and we put ourselves as the last priority. Or sometimes we don't prioritize ourselves at all, and we self-harm. So for an example, when I was going through a journey of healing myself, every time I would go meet people from my childhood, I will come back and I will start self-harming. I will smoke, I will drink until my lungs can't take it. I would do that. I have done that. And I'm not afraid of saying that's phone response. As a child growing up, I had to feed my family. I have to take care of my family. I had to parent my family. I had to cook for my sister. When I was just like, what, 6 years old, 7 years old, I had to take care of my sister. She was 2 years old. So I learned to people please and to put myself last because as a child, I didn't understand. So I invite you, do you recognize this behavior in you? Do you recognize these behaviors somewhat not in a normal range? And what is a normal range, right? So this is what we call trauma responses. And if you're experiencing any of this, if you know anyone experiencing of this, you need to know that it's unconscious, at least for the first few seconds or for the few minutes. In order for them to catch themselves back in the few minutes, they need to have a great awareness. If they are not, if they don't have that reflective ability, because they are disconnecting from the reality, they might not ever recognize that they are going through that. So it doesn't matter how much you would blame, how many times you would say, did I not tell you not to turn off the light? Did I not tell you to flush the toilet? You can say it forever. But if they didn't realize that it is a trauma response, they wouldn't know. You can keep saying there's no point because it's unconscious. Now, earlier I showed you this image, and now I have added something new to it. Earlier we thought trauma is something that happened to us during our lifetime. But now we are recognizing, even before your parents gave you the DNA of themselves, they got those DNA from their parents, their grandparents, great-grandparents, and ancestors. So they passed on that trauma to you because they love you. Have you ever wondered, why am I going through this? Why can I not break from this specific behavior, feeling, thinking? Can you not find the reason? Can you not put a finger on it? It may be because you are experiencing a specific generational trauma that is activated depending on the kind of specific triggers, specific environmental conditions, specific DNA activation within your body, so that you have no idea why you are behaving in a certain way, why there's scarcity in you, why you can't build a relationship, why every time someone loves you, you run away from that person, why you became so psychotic in a relationship, why you cannot accept yourself, why you cannot feel comfortable accepting money. It might not even be your problem. You know that we as human civilization have come through many dark periods. And during those dark periods, human beings experience deep lack, deep insecurities, deep fears. And your grandparents, your ancestors were so afraid of it. So there's a higher intelligence which loves you. embodied that fear into your grandparents' DNA, and you end up receiving it. So now that we have gotten a bit of an understanding of trauma, very, very basic understanding of trauma, now I invite you to recognize how serious it is. People don't even realize that there's trauma. It's almost like we don't notice the clouds on the sky. It's right there. It's almost like we don't recognize that we are breathing oxygen. It's right there. It's always there, but we don't know because we don't necessarily see it. Unless we look at some statistics, unless we reflect, unless we recognize, unless we educate ourselves. Do you know that if you counted more than 6 aces and some of those adverse experiences that we discussed a while ago, more than 6, there is a potential that your life expansion could be reduced in 20 years. Can you believe that? Do you know that people who experience ACEs, especially a high score of ACEs, have a very high risk of depressive disorders? About 18, almost like 20% compared to people who don't have ACEs. Do you know people who have had more than 4 ACEs significantly have a higher risk of increased dependencies like smoking, alcoholism, drug abuse, and so on? And people who have more than 4 ACEs have a very high risk of physical health issues. I'm not talking about people who smoke or use alcohol. People who do not use any of that are within this 27.4 percentage. Do you know that 70% of the global population has experienced a traumatic event at some point in their life? Now, this doesn't include generational trauma. This doesn't include all the trauma that we have disassociated because we are in freeze response. We live in freeze response for the entire lifetime, so we don't know. You know that 77.7% of the people experience some level of post-traumatic stress disorder because of the traumatic experiences that they have gone through in their life. And this includes 13.1% of rape and 15% sexual assault. I know exactly what I'm talking about because I have experienced some of these interesting things. And you know, in US alone, just depression and anxiety cost $1 trillion US. Imagine that. And I can vouch for this in Thailand since I work with many mental health care professionals like psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, and other professionals. After COVID, they are booked up until 6 months. It's difficult to find a psychiatrist at the moment in Thailand to get a quick appointment. All right, so now we have some understanding about what trauma is. We have some understanding about effects of trauma and how severe it can be. Let's look at the case study that I mentioned to you earlier. So as a professional coach, I'm going to invite you to look at this from the professional coach lens. A professional coach who has been through a traditional professional coaching education, traditional definition of professional coaching. I'm introducing to you one of my clients, Mike, not the real name. He's a senior leader in a financial organization. Real story. He comes to the coach, very well dressed, with a nice smile, and says, I have been procrastinating since a few weeks ago. I don't feel any drive. I feel socially withdrawn. Obviously, as a coach, you ask, tell me a little bit more about you. I have work-life balance problems. I recently had a stroke. It was a wake-up call. I am a senior executive, so obviously I'm in a very stressed, high stress environment. I'm also a high achiever. I have a very fast-paced lifestyle. I'm overweight. I have an unhealthy lifestyle. I'm single and I'm a workaholic. Who is not, right? Coach, and they laugh with you. You laugh with them. Now, if the client's intention is to get rid of procrastination, light up their drive, and not be socially withdrawn or to become social again, what do you think are the typical outcome of coaching session? Of course, we can't immediately vouch for it, right? Because our clients find those answers. But if you have ever undertaken a client like this, I see many coaches are doing burnout as their niche. If you are a coach who is operating in traditional coaching frame, traditional definition of coaching, if you undertake procrastination, socially withdrawn people, people with no drive, what are some of the common outcomes do you think could be possible? Well, you know that better than me, right? But let's think about a trauma-informed professional coach. A trauma-informed professional coach has an additional layer of listening. It can be like additional layer of glasses or additional layer of hearing. It's a new layer that we usually don't talk about when we talk about listening skills in traditional definition of coaching, which is listening to trauma. So let me ask you, do you listen to your client's trauma? Do you listen to trauma responses of your clients? And what does that mean to you? And what does that mean to you if you are not listening to the trauma responses of your clients? Now, let's look at the reality. Now, this is what Mike is telling us, but we need to find out what's the reality. So recently, Mike had a stroke and he was hospitalized. So he has a very unhealthy lifestyle. We know this. He was brought to hospital with this mini stroke, which was he lived an ease life. He was at ease, and then all of a sudden there was the dis part of it. The ease wasn't there, the mini stroke. So he went to the doctor. Doctor went through a very specific screening process and said, diagnosed, you have obesity, you have anxiety, you have depression. The stroke is related to a combination of these causes. And listening to you, I'm also recognizing that you have an eating disorder. So I'm recognizing that you have stress. And this is what the doctor thinks is the supposed root cause. How many of you know this? How many of you think that most of the problem we have in life is stress? Stress is a day-to-day thing. Who doesn't have stress? Our clients say things like that to us. What do you do when that happens? Now, coming back here, doctor gives medicine prescribed or send them to conventional therapy or even asked to go to a coach. So when they take the medicine, the stress disappears. So the ease is created again and mind goes back to their normal lifestyle, back to same patterns. Is this a story that you have heard? I have heard so many times. And a trauma-informed professional coach is able to go beyond that kind of diagnosis. It doesn't mean trauma-informed coaches diagnose anything, but we are able to understand our clients at a deeper level, much, much deeper level, when we are able to recognize trauma responses, when we are able to make our clients aware that they are operating from a place of unconscious triggers, unconscious trauma responses. And as all professional coaches, we know that empathy is one of the most strongest attributes that we intend to embody. The moment you are aware of trauma, how trauma operates, you have created a deeper level of empathy to recognize your client, see your client, understand your client or see it from the client's perspective. Now, like I said, a trauma-informed coach or a practitioner who is operating with trauma knowledge is able to go deeper. Looking at this example, often when we see a human being in front of us, we think there's just one thing in front of us, right? One unit. You're looking at me, just one Fernando. That's what you probably see. But the truth is, it's not. It's so much more than that. Just for your awareness, here's a few systems that can independently and collectively operate together. Skeletal system, nervous system, muscle system, all that. But there are more systems in our body than we actually know, because we think we are civilized, we think we are developed, we think we have MRI machines, we think we know ourselves. But only when you start really learning medicine, when you only start learning really psychology, neuroscience, you start realizing the more we learn, the more we realize we know very little. What we know is very little, what we don't know is actually immense. So there are so many systems. So I invite you to think, when you look at your clients, do you see these systems or you see just one thing, one person? Now, since you are seeing many things, you invite the client to explore. Now, this is also an interesting paradigm that in traditional coaching models, we can't go back, right? So we don't ask about the client's past most of the time. If we did, it's very superficial. But when we talk to Mike, Mike tells us that they feel suffocated, they feel they are limited, they smoke, they have all these habits, eating habits, and their heart is never fulfilled. They don't have life, and they don't have love, and they have a very negative self-image, always bombarded with work. The story of most executives, many of your leadership coaches, many of your executive coaches, and you have heard these stories, I believe. I hear it every day. And then a trauma-informed coach actually invite the client to go back and try to find where the triggers come from. And you learn Mike had been neglected as a little child and is. Mike had been very severely, strictly controlled, even physically punished growing up, coming from a generation of doctors, generation of executives. We call them legacy burdens in therapy. Mike had been inappropriately touched because he was afraid to go to their parents. He was afraid to really be in the care of the parents. So he sought some comfort from a stranger or someone in the family. Most of the time, someone in the family. Most of the time, someone closer to you, inappropriately touched. And it created a scar in Mike's mind. And Mike also disassociated himself from his peer circles, developing social anxiety. And as we talk to our clients and go deeper with them, they are able to recognize these instances and starting to connect dots. I'm demonstrating this behavior, a trauma response triggered by a specific incident from my past. So I was talking about brain earlier. I mentioned to you that we have a cerebral brain, our thinking brain, which connects all the dots, which we think we are, which we believe very strongly that we know everything, we are in control. But the real truth is, when you're 30 years old, your brain is developed in a way that you believe that you know, but you are actually subcortically, subconsciously controlled, unconsciously controlled. Everything that you're going around and doing right now is actually a program that you already have instilled without even you realizing it. And to go further and understand what is happening in the brain of Mike. So when Mike has been in an environment where he didn't feel safe, it's a little bit like this. Think about a danger that you are really scared of. I am scared of snakes. So when I love snakes, but if I see them close by, I get scared. Now imagine when I'm in the forest, if I saw a snake, my whole body prepares me to get myself to safety, fight, flight response, right? I'm not going to confront a snake. I'm going to run away from it. So which means that I am actually preparing myself to run away. That means there's enough blood that needs to go to my amygdala, activate fight, flight response. So adrenaline rushing through my body, my heart is pumping fast, my muscle system is ready to run, right? So the amygdala controls this function. At the same time, of course, amygdala also makes sure that it doesn't send any blood to my hippocampus, which is my memory, learning, and emotion center. It's not important right now. And it also doesn't send much information to my executive function and motor control, except for getting myself ready to run. The only decision that I had to make during this time is managing my stress enough to make the decision to run. And actually, it is an instinctual decision that I make. So it's actually really controlled by amygdala. Now, that happened to me one time in the forest. But what? Every corner I walk inside of my living environment as a child, as an adolescent, there's a snake following me everywhere. In other words, there's danger, there's threat being presented to me in my living environment on a regular basis. Think about yourself. If you grew up in an environment where you didn't feel safe, if you felt threatened, if you felt afraid, if no one made you feel comfortable, that means most of the blood went into amygdala, and on a constant basis, it hardwired your entire nervous system to get yourself to safety, 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 to get yourself to safety. And when that has happened so many times, it becomes your natural state of being, which means that now amygdala is always activated. Not enough blood will go into hippocampus. Not enough blood will go into basal ganglia and prefrontal cortex, where we make the executive decisions, decision making, stress management. The reason is because the amygdala needs more blood because it has to process the fear. So if you have experienced learning difficulties, if you doubted yourself, am I stupid? Do I have a learning disability? Why can I not process emotions correctly? Why do I run away from my emotions? Why am I not able to make a decision quickly? Why am I not able to manage my stress right? It may be because you grew up in fear. You grew up in anxiety all the time. So you were an anxious kid. Other parts of your brain didn't receive enough blood to really process. And this is what is happening with Mike right now. There are so many trauma responses. He grew up in an environment he didn't feel safe. And with this new reality that he's experiencing with the stroke and everything around it, once again, his trauma is triggered. So now what happens is he's no longer processing emotions, memories, and learning in the right way. He cannot control his stress. He cannot make the right decisions. He cannot make a decision between emotion and the logics because his fear response is activated. So he's socially withdrawn. So he doesn't want to act. He doesn't want to go back to work. He doesn't want to face his team because he's fearful. He cannot make decisions. And as an executive, his job function is to make decisions. And that's exactly what he can do right now. And this is subcortical brain, which is underneath the white color part, the limbic system, the emotional part of our brain. Outer layer of our brain is cerebral cortex, cortexical brain, right? So the subcortical brain is unconscious, subconscious brain, and Mike cannot control it. No matter how many strategies he will share, no matter how many strategies he would come up with, he cannot control it because he's driven now by a trauma response because triggers are present. He has awakened a giant that was sleeping. And this happens to us time to time. And usually these are visible trauma because he remembered, but you know that there's a lot of invisible trauma as well. So when an experienced trauma-informed coach, they're able to interpret complex trauma in association with the client. And we call them CPTSD, complex post-stress traumatic stress disorder. Right? Imagine that. So they are unable to necessarily even create the right connection to recognize what is the real problem because there are so many things that has happened to us. So in other words, if you have experienced several ACEs and then several different trauma experiences, we might not even be able to pinpoint and say this is the real problem. Now, I want to invite you to a deeper layer a trauma-informed coach will have awareness of. We talk about survival earlier. There's a danger, there's a threat, so a trauma response. There's the alert, so the cortisol is released to our body so that our heartbeat is fast and we can get ourselves to safety. So we do, and then we get to our safety and we calm down, we cool down. But in Mike's situation, this is a snake, but in Mike's situation, it's invisible. What is it? There's a lot of stress in his life. It could be any type of stress, acute stress, chronic stress, traumatic stress, doesn't matter. Cortisol released into his body, fight and flight response is activated. Now his heart is beating, he's preparing to fight or flight. But we have thought, stress is a normal thing in day-to-day life. I'm an executive, that's why I get paid a lot of money. It should be all right. So what do? Nothing. We don't take actions. So that means our internal systems are alerting us to get ourselves to safety with loving care, but we don't recognize. And it has to go to the level of giving us a heart attack or a stroke. Then it's telling us very loud, screaming, it's begging. But the interesting thing is, as I'm living in Thailand, if I step out of my house, walk for 2 minutes, I will always find street food. Sometimes what I pay to get a nice kilo of barbecue, I just feel like I'm stealing from people because the food is so easily available to us as human beings. And at the moment we have fridge, we can buy food from farms, you can buy food from supermarkets. But if we went back to several generations back into our ancestors, we didn't have food always available to us. We were hunter-gatherer at some time. And those times, as human beings, while we were looking for food, we went extensive periods of time without having enough food. So our bodies already automatically developed mechanisms to safeguard ourselves, collecting enough fat in our body, so that during a time that we don't have enough food, we are able to break down the fat and then consume it, convert that into energy. How about now? What are we doing now? Since there's a lot of food available, we are not necessarily going through those periods that we don't have enough food. How is this related? Why am I saying this all of a sudden in the middle of this presentation? It's because of this. Now, when there's some level of threat in our body, asking us to fight flight, there's a lot of cortisol in our body. So there's a response that is created in our body. And it's begging us to take ourselves to safety. And when we don't, it begs more. So it releases more cortisol. We say it's only stress. We don't have to worry, right? So we don't do anything. So the body is worried. Body is loving. Body is kind. So it releases more cortisol. That means it invites us to, now it doesn't know that where the stress comes from, because you see, our outer layer of the brain can understand and process, but our inside of the brain doesn't necessarily understand fear, and we don't understand where, like if I like what we talked about earlier, right? When we looked at the fish tank, we know we shouldn't be thinking about the we shouldn't be thinking about the goldfish, but what we really do is that. And that's exactly what happened to me. If you knew me personally, you will know during my early 20s, even up until mid 30s, I drank every night. I'm not afraid of saying that. Some nights I drank half a bottle of vodka to get myself to sleep, because my immediate family member, one of them, used to consume a lot of alcohol growing up. So I always said, never drink alcohol, never drink alcohol, never drink alcohol, never drink alcohol, never drink alcohol. My brain didn't hear never, it heard alcohol. So I started drinking when I was young, and yeah, but I don't drink alcohol anymore because I know this, I know how to manage, at least as of now. And there's the healing journey still evolving in front of me. So what do? Our body is telling us to get ourselves to safety. It's worried we might die, so it starts storing body fat. Our body is thinking, our subconscious mind, our nervous system is thinking, something is wrong, something is wrong, something is wrong. In case if this person fell down and couldn't walk anymore. I need to have enough fat cells. So let's develop fat. So we start eating. Eating is, quick rewards, right? All the good hormones are kicking in. So we feel like, oh, great. It's happy. It's great. So what do? We want more rewards. So we eat more. So what happens? We develop obesity. We develop anxiety, depression. And that brings us to stress. It might be acute stress that triggers some incidental stress, or it may be some level of problem that we are experiencing in our life for a very long time persist. Now that becomes chronic. Or we experience some level of trauma. Now there is stress, and that triggers cortisol again and many other hormones, and it goes in cycles and circles. So that's why I was talking about the food earlier. And it's very much like our brain, thinking brain, our unconscious brain not being able to synchronize because we don't have the conscious awareness, because no one helped us to interpret trauma, no one recognized the trigger, no one recognized the trauma response. And this is why often I call that when we have past trauma, operated unconsciously, get triggered all the time without even knowing, even little incidents, it's like invisible chains. We are bound by invisible chains that we don't recognize that we are. We think it's normal. Remember earlier I asked you two interesting questions. What are some of your behaviors and feelings around these challenges? The challenges that we talked about earlier. I ask you, are you able to consciously control these behaviors, feelings and thoughts? I don't think I have to explain anything here. You're already recognizing if you are in the right place, right mindset, and willing to reflect already. And you might also be able to now link to some of the challenges that you're experiencing to certain experiences that you may have had in the past. Now, this is where this journey started for me when I couldn't really serve my clients like Mike. We were going in circles and circles, but I was promising life transformation. I was promising reinventing life. But what I didn't realize was my clients were experiencing complex post-traumatic stress disorder because I didn't have the right ears. I didn't have the right lenses up until I started learning about the importance of recognizing trauma and starting to wear the trauma lenses and listening to my clients at a deeper level, building empathy at a level that I understood why they're experiencing what they were experiencing. So I realized all my promises were false. I said I do integrated approach to coaching. I said I deliver holistic coaching. And most importantly, I said I deliver transformational coaching. And now I know even knowing the knowledge of trauma is not adequate to deliver trauma transformational coaching. It's at surface level what we do. All those breakthroughs, aha moments that we create for our clients are worthless if our clients weren't able to follow up, follow through, and achieve that success that they are seeking. That was a true wake up call for me, a reality check for me. So I invite you to think, do you use words like integrated coaching, holistic, transformational, and how true are we to ourselves? I love this analogy. Let's say you have been tasked with transforming a tree that is not doing very well into a thriving tree. The first thing we probably would do is water the plants, give the fertilizer, put them in the right amount of sunlight. But the tree is still not improving. And what would you do? What would be the most obvious things to do? Of course, to examine the roots. Are they rotten? Are they infested by root pests? If that's the case, then we need to change the soil. Then we need to find the right solution. if I go back, the traditional sense of coaching is a little bit like this, isn't it? Meeting the client where they are, moving forward with them into the future, always pushing them, challenge them all the time, without really recognizing that this person could be affected by trauma in a way that we have no idea. So obviously, if they are already experiencing trauma responses, the more and more they are unable to achieve the success, transformation, and those homework that they take home, the more they will start sabotaging themselves. The more they will say that they are not good enough. The more they will feel guilty. The more they will damage themselves at a deeper level. And not only that, potentially as a professional coach, we might also be disappointed in ourselves because I try everything. I have done all the trainings, but I still cannot help my clients truly, or my clients cannot help themselves truly. So there you are. So this is your moment to answer the question, should every coach be trauma informed? Or if you can decide for others, you can ask yourself, should you be trauma informed? And I don't think it's a question that I can answer for you. But as a professional coach, it's my responsibility to ask that question. And that's what we do as professional coaches. We inquire. And I mentioned to you that this is only recognizing the problem. But the problem doesn't end there. Just because we know the problem doesn't mean it's solved. So in my journey to becoming who I am, doing what I'm doing right now, I ask myself the question, how do I actually really act as a catalyst? How can I help clients at a deeper level? So I found the ultimate catalyst in my personal understanding, which is psychedelics. I use several plant psychedelics that are just available in our ecosystem that can create this profound neurological change in our clients' subconscious mind, enable them to resolve and recover from trauma, heal from complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So I have another sharing on the 19th of May on this topic. So if this sharing intrigues your curious mind, I invite you to join this session and learn about psychedelic integration. It may or may not be for everyone because of the interesting situation in the world about how we are still scared of things right there in our backyards, things that just come out of the cow dung, rhino dung, elephant dung, because we as human beings have been traumatized, so we are afraid. We are afraid to look within. And I think what happened to us during the COVID time, we had no option but to look at ourselves. So that there's a lot of mental health crises happening in the world right now. So if you intend to enable your clients to thrive like this beautiful tree over here, we need to keep in mind looking at just one part of the tree is not going to be enough. We need to see the bigger picture. So I invite you to reassess your practice and invite you to a space of a reality check fully authentically and answer this question for yourself. Should we, as professional coaches, be trauma informed? And my intention through this topic is actually even to create a bigger ripple in the world, even to certain coaching accreditation organizations, and help them understand how important it is to incorporate into even the coaching definitions and frameworks, bringing in this deeper knowledge so that our coaches can be extremely effective. So they actually can create the impact they wanted to create, not when they went through coach education programs, but their initial intentions, fulfill that initial intention. So if you resonate with this sharing, or if you don't resonate with this sharing, I would love to hear your thoughts. Like I said, there are only two questions. How do you resonate with this sharing? And what is your key takeaway from this session? As you're typing that in your mobile phone, I would also invite you to put it into the chat as well so everyone can have a look as well. So once again, thank you very much for joining me in this brief sharing on trauma-informed professional coaching. And it has been a privilege to have all of you with me in this space. And I'm deeply honored that you were in this space and you shared this space with me. And I wish you all the very best creating healing development in your clients as we celebrate International Coaching Week. And thank you for being an integral part of Ignite Professional Network. I look forward to co-creating with you in the future. And once again, I'm so deeply humbled that you're here. Thank you for now, and bye-bye. I'll see you in our next session. Feel free to leave your messages, coaches. I will also I will unmute all of you if you would like to share any thought. All right.
Hi, Fernando.
Hi,
Sunita here.
Sunita. Yes.
It's so amazing to learn about your journey. And I always used to wonder uh, that coaching is great, yet there are areas of my life where I felt um, that coaching alone doesn't help. There are patterns, there are uh, still areas where I felt that couldn't be addressed through coaching. Um, I've been exploring healing for many years, and when I heard you share about the integrated approach that you take, I'm really inspired. Earlier today, I booked some time with you for later this month. I'm really looking forward to meet you and talk to you. This is something that is really amazing. I'm really very happy to be here as part of this session. Look forward to attending the session on 19th as well.
Thank you, Sunita.
Thank
I
you.
saw your invitation coming in. I look forward to meeting you too. I'm humbled that you are here, and I'm glad that more and more coaches are recognizing that we have a scope of responsibility, I would say, not just work, a bigger responsibility to
Yes.
recognize to be in this space responsibly. Because I think if we are operating without the deep awareness of human beings, I think we are doing more damage. And I think we need to rise up to that challenge and be honest with ourselves. So I'm glad more and more coaches are becoming aware like you. Thank you, Sunita. Thank
Thank
you for
you.
being
Thank
here.
you.
Thank you, Leona. I see many interesting sharings coming from many of you. Thank you, coaches. If you would like to, as our final remarks, if any of you would like to share anything, feel free to take this space. Larissa, go for it.
Yes, hi. I know you mentioned, of course, the necessity, and I see for myself there's a need for trauma-informed education for us coaches. Would you please give me an example out of probably many approaches? What can we do? Like, what one of the, I don't know, what to call it, modules or treatments that you would offer to clients with complex trauma? Like one of the examples, like it all borders on therapy, right? So out of many approaches, can you give an example of at least one thing
Certainly.
that's different from coaching? Thank you.
Certainly. I think one of the important things that we need to keep in mind is like not really to diagnose our clients or treat our clients unless we have the right expertise. So I would say as a professional coach, because we have the ability to be able to create that innate development and forward movement in clients, what we also could do is if we could look back at the client and try to recognize certain trauma responses and the root causes, making our clients aware of it, inviting them to a space, safe, psychologically safe space, having the right safe care measurements, inviting the client to explore it. And if the client is able to go and pinpoint like a specific recent specific trauma or a trigger, then we can assess it from there. Number one would be if we absolutely don't have an ability to help the client with that because we don't have the specialization or we don't have the qualification, then we can build an alliance with set of clinical psychologists, psychiatrists, and people who are qualified to address this problem. So our very first approach would be once we recognize it, we pass it on to one of those professionals who can help them. And the second step would be to continue to educate ourselves in many different ways so that we can gain the right qualifications. So not only we work as a professional coach, maybe by the side we could work as a psychologist or any other healing modality that we might be using. So then we can very clearly educate the client. I have both the qualifications. So now I'm going to be changing the hats, right? We can be changing the hats. Now I take the role of therapist or a psychologist or whatever that we would be doing apart from the coaching. In fact, we have noticed lately more and more psychologists are embracing our coach education programs. I think the reason is that often psychologists have this the way the therapists and the psychologists operate is that we have a toolbox and then we pull out whatever the tool or the strategy that is required to provide the intervention to the client. Mostly it's a fixing of the client. We approach as if there's something wrong with our patient or the client. But the world of psychologists, even psychiatrists, starting to recognize that coaching has a very last night in one of our advanced coaching certifications, literally a clinical psychologist mentioned to me that how beautiful the coaching framework, and she was talking about the ability to incorporate coaching and all the therapeutic approaches together and create massive value for the clients. So any way, I'm not inviting any of you to prescribe, diagnose, or treat clients if you are not qualified to do so, but having the right alliance to refer to and refer really quickly, and also if you intend to develop further, not only as a coach, but also other professional, gaining the right set of skills and the qualification, certification, licenses, so that we can treat our clients as well. Larissa, to give you an example, I could say in one of the sessions, a client was having some neuropathic problem and he couldn't find the reason. He couldn't pinpoint the reason. So he also has had some physical trauma recently. So he was thinking that was the problem. So during one of the deep, let's say a deeper state of consciousness session, he was able to identify some experience of female energy. So he was talking about it immediately after that vibrational or altered state of consciousness experience with me. And then he was talking about it. And then he mentioned this female energy. And then he just quickly moved on. So I made a note. And then later on, I told him, can you tell me about the female energy? He said, there's nothing there. It's just a quick energy. I said, shall we stay with that if you don't mind and tap into it? And then a little bit later, he thought about it and he said, it seemed like some old woman. It's like my grandmom energy. So I invited him to share what might be the situation with your grandmom. And he said, I have never seen my grandmom and I'm not allowed to talk about grandmom. So immediately you recognize trauma responses and some sort of family dynamics. So then I invited him, if you feel comfortable, safe, would you like to talk about what is going on with your grandmom? And then he mentioned the story very shortly, if I'm to say. So his grandfather passed away and his grandmom was attached to him very strongly. When he passed away, grandmom became very bitter and became very angry with the whole world. And then one day his mom, my client's mom, who was a young girl at the time, walked into the room, found her mother hanging from the roof. So obviously there was that very strong trauma that took place in mom's body and mom's mind, and she didn't want to talk about grandmom and her mom and her dad because of the traumatic experience around it. So freeze response, right? Disassociation. So he didn't permit anyone in the family to talk about it. As a result, he was never able to talk about it. So this is an example when the coach is trauma informed, when we have other expertise that we are able to recognize when the clients are going through certain experiences. So then, of course, we continued in combination of professionals. We provided the necessary treatment for the client, and then he was able to recover from some of the difficulties he was experiencing, which was an unconscious response. Because he made it conscious, he was able to see that, he was able to recognize that. Now, if you come from an Eastern background, if you're familiar with Vipassana, which is a Buddhist meditation practice, the true meaning of Vipassana is, or the literal meaning of Sanskrit word Vipassana is seeing or observation. So when we are able to observe something for what it is, without for who we are, our lenses, when we can remove all the lenses and look at something, the half of the healing already happens. So as a professional coach, when we are able to recognize what is happening, we are absolutely able to um, at least make our clients awareness. And that awareness itself is some deep level of healing already. So I think I have a lot of examples. I think this is just a very simple example I'd like to share with you, how trauma is hiding in our body, hiding in our mind. Sometimes it's even generational. We have no idea that we are suffering from some of those. So what happened with this client was the physical trauma triggered the neuropathic response, but it wasn't the physical trauma itself that created the neuropathic pain. The neuropathic pain really came from potentially the generational trauma that his mother undertook in her body and mind, because he was born years after she witnessed this suicide.
Well, thank you so much. It's so interesting. Like, it reminds me of family systems. I'm sure you're familiar with it as well. So thank you. I look forward to staying in touch. Thank you for responding. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, yes. All right, coaches, if you have, maybe I'll invite one or two more to share any insights, any questions, and then we say goodbye. All right, so if you don't have any further questions, I look forward to meeting you and keep in touch. Thank you very much. Good night for now, or have a great day, depending on where you are. Bye for now.